Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Today's lecture is on metaphysical poetry. This lecture is meant for the students of semester 2 who are pursuing their BA English at SP College Dumka. The poets who are prescribed in your syllabus are Donne, Andrew Marvell and Henry Vaughan. We have read the poems of Donne and Henry Vaughan in the class, and I have given you study material on Andrew Marvell as well. This lecture is going to be a summary lecture on the concept of metaphysical poetry, and we will also see that how these three poets and the poems by these three poets tie up very neatly with this broad umbrella term of metaphysical poetry. Before coming to the poets, first let us clarify that what this term metaphysical poetry means. To put it very simply, the word metaphysical, it means to go beyond the physical aspect of life. And what are the physical aspects of life? What you see in the world that we inhabit, what you experience in the world in which we live, what you feel in the world that we call our home, right? Now, as human beings, we experience various emotions, and we have our own ways of articulating those emotions. In poetry, we find that emotions of love, pain, longing, even solitude, depression, all of these themes are talked about. Now, the reason metaphysical poets are called metaphysical poets is because even though they talk about the themes of love, happiness, pleasure, contentment, union with the higher self, they talk about spirituality also, but they do it in a language which is very different to the language which was used by the poets who came before them, and the language which is being used by the poets today. Metaphysical poetry rests on this idea of the conceit, right? So there is something called the metaphysical conceit, which you see in all these three poems that are prescribed in your syllabus. Now, what is conceit? It is a very confusing term, but to put it very simply, the conceit is the intellectual foundation of any poem. So if I am a poet, and if I have to articulate my feelings in form of a poem, then it is not enough only to say that I am happy or I am sad or I am happy in these ways, but in order to explain my emotions, I take help of many associated topics, right? I would sometimes perhaps equate my happiness to watching a sunrise. Sometimes I may equate my sadness with a bare tree that has no leaves. Sometimes I may articulate the feeling of depression with a sky which is extremely dark and you cannot even see the stars, right? Let alone the moon. Now, these ways of articulating emotions are your very ordinary ways, right? You would see that poets across time, they fall back on such articulations. They fall back on using these metaphors. But this was not the case with metaphysical poets. Metaphysical poets were very contemporary in the handling of the subject matter. They would fearlessly use concepts that were beginning to gain traction in their society, in their time. We see this in the example of Donne's poem, The Good Morrow. Now, when Donne is writing, this is the period of Renaissance, and after that, we see that sea voyages are taking place. And these voyages would start from Europe, and then these ships would go to all parts of the world. We already have Copernicus and Galileo who say that, and who prove that the earth goes around the sun and not the other way. We have new advancements in geography. We have new advancements in cartography, which is the science of making maps. And we have advancements also in medical science, right? Now, in the poem by John Donne, the conceit is that of equality in love, right? The idea behind the poem, the intellectual foundation of the poem, is that love is an exercise in which, or not an exercise, that would be a crude way to put it, but love is an experience in which the two parties must participate equally, right? And if there is no equal participation in love, then that love is not going to sustain, that love is not going to last. And in order to highlight this equality, John Donne uses the metaphor of the world. Say, for example, in this line, right? So, in the second stanza, the very last line of the second stanza, we see, let us possess one world, each hath one and is one. What is happening in this line is that Donne is saying that let both of us, the two lovers, possess one world, right? A shared, commonly shared one world. But at the same time, both has one world each, and both is and both are one world each. Actually, both share one world, both have one world, and both are one world, right? However, even though both are separate worlds, but the intensity or the composition or the things out of which these worlds are made of are similar, right? So the energies are similar, the intensity is similar, the feelings are similar, right? And when we come to the very last stanza and the last two lines, line 6 and 7, we see, if our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike that none do slacken, none can die. To put it very simply, John Donne says that if the love that I feel for you and the love that you feel for me are of the same kind, right? That if both of us love each other in a similar, equal manner, then neither of us will lose the love, and neither of us will let the love die. And this love is going to sustain through the period in which we are in love together, right? The principal argument, which is articulated by one line in the poem, can be found in the third stanza, the last stanza, and in line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in line number 5, which says, whatever dies was not mixed equally, which means that if there is love, and if that love is not working out, and if that love is very close to dying, the reason behind that death is because there was no equal participation in love, right? So the conceit behind John Donne's poem is, again, equal participation, equal give and take in love. Now let's come to our second poet. Our second poet is Henry Vaughan, and the poem that is in our syllabus is The Retreat. The conceit of this poem is that when a person is born and when he or she is in the infant stage, when they are in the infant stage, then they are the closest to God, right? Because they are just newly born on earth. They are yet unaffected by the physical world, right? So they are more attached. They can access the spiritual, metaphysical realm more easily. And as a person begins to grow up, and as a person begins to amass experience, and as a person begins to get in touch with the workings of the physical world, the workings of the situations around them, he or she begins to lose their innocence bit by bit by bit. And when they lose their innocence, then they begin to grow further and further detached from divinity or God. Finally, Henry Vaughan ends the poem by saying that when I have finished my life term on earth and when I will die, then I may find myself retreating back to heaven in the company of the divinity, in the company of God, and taking my place among the angels, right? Taking my place among all the divine beings that are there in heaven, and that retreat will bring me the ultimate contentment, satisfaction, happiness. In John Donne's poem, this feeling of happiness and contentment comes from equal participation in love. In Henry Vaughan's poem, The Retreat, the subject matter is very, very metaphysical because he talks about the connection of the metaphysical world with the physical reality through the experiences of an individual, right? So the subject matter deals with both the physical as well as spiritual realm, and the retreat is possible only in death. So when a person dies, then they may hope that the soul will return to the Maker, to the God, right? Now, if we come to the third poet in our syllabus, then the third poet is Andrew Marvell, and the poem that is prescribed in the syllabus is The Garden. The conceit behind this poem, according to Marvell, is that man is happiest when he is in a garden, when he has labored in the garden, when he has put his energies in order to grow trees of shade. And Marvell begins his poem by saying that men who run after fame, run after recognition, run after these small pleasures in life, what they get in return? They get in return the shade of trees that are not really shade providing trees. They get the shade of oak, they get the shade of the palm trees, or they get the shade of the bay trees, right? And these trees are not the trees that give you shade. So if you run after shallow things, then you will get shallow rewards in the end. But if you run after higher things, if you run after higher goals, then you will find that you will be rewarded by very substantial shade, solace, and happiness. Marvell's idea is that man's original work is that of a gardener, and he goes back to substantiate his argument, or he goes to back up his argument by referring to the Christian mythology, where Adam was the gardener at paradise, at the Garden of Eden, and that was his happy state before Adam was expelled from paradise, right? Why? Because he ate the fruit of knowledge, the apple, and in some variations, the fig. So this garden state where man can be truly content, man can be truly happy, man can have productive thoughts, man can have green thoughts, right? Green is equal to productivity, it is equal to like flow of ideas, it is equal, it stands for abundance in a positive manner, in a positive way. In all these three poems, right, we see that whether it is John Donne, whether it is Andrew Marvell, or whether it is Henry Vaughan, they treat the idea of pleasure as something shallow. Now, if we come to John Donne's poem, The Good Morrow, we will notice that in the very first stanza, he says, I wonder by my troth, what thou and I did till we loved, were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly, right? And John Donne wonders that what were the two of us, the two lovers, me and you, what were we doing before we fell in love? What we were doing? We were getting distracted by silly things. We were getting distracted by shallow pleasures, right? Country pleasures, little things, till we fell in love and found our higher calling, right? Found something higher than us, found something very substantial, something that makes both of us happy. And this love is where equal give and take, equal participation takes place. When we come to Henry Vaughan's poem, The Retreat, here also we see that he regards the experiences that people obtain in the physical world, in the physical reality, as something very trivial, as something which is inconsequential, as something which does not actually have much impact on man's attainment of this higher state of happiness. And he says that before I taught my tongue to wound my conscience with a sinful sound, or had the black art to dispense a several sin to every sense, but felt through all this fleshly dress bright shoots of everlastingness. And here in these lines we see that Marvell is saying that all of these, like the nearness to the divinity, the proximity to God, was hindered by my speech, which had acquired the negatives of the physical world, of the reality in which we live in, or the several sins which I have committed in order to satisfy my senses, and none of these things compared to what used to exist before when I was an infant, when through this body, even through this body which is meant to facilitate, which is meant for people to experience things, that even through this body I was able to maintain a contact, some sort of contact with the divine powers who reside above in the heaven. When we come to the poem by Andrew Marvell, The Garden, we see that here also Marvell makes a distinction between pleasure and happiness. And just like he says before that men run so much after trivial things, so much after things like fame, so much after things like recognition, that people should think that I am a very nice person, people should think that I am a very brave person, intellectual person, so on and so forth, right? But all of this running around for something which is not going to last, right? some pleasures which are only temporary, these kind of distractions keep us from realizing our higher goals, right? And what is the higher goal? For Donne, the higher goal is the attainment of the state of happiness through equal participation in love. For Andrew Marvell, the higher goal is to achieve the state of satisfaction, happiness, contentment by returning to the original job, which is of a gardener, returning to the duty of the gardener, and actually working in the garden in order to grow all these beautiful flowers. So if you work hard in the garden, then you will get similar rewards, you will get good rewards. And these good rewards are what? These good rewards are that you are able to just raise your hand and this fruit will come into your hand, right? That you will just spend your time walking in the garden, falling down on the grass, making sure that you are not stepping onto melons, making sure that you have proper shade under huge, nice trees, right? And when we come to Henry Vaughan, his poem deals with this attainment of happiness, spiritual contentment through a retreat towards the heaven, right? And this retreat is possible after death. This retreat is possible after death because in the lifetime, as a person grows up, they grow more and more detached from the God, from the heaven, because they are corrupted by the ways of the world. They are corrupted by the sins that exist in the world, and they cannot help but participate in those sins, right? Because once you are born on earth, you are born as someone who is able to feel things, someone who is able to sense things. And when you are born on earth, you are not born as an individual only, but you are also born as an individual who exists within a society. And as an individual who exists within a society, you have to make certain compromises even if you don't want to. So say for example, if you don't want to utter a curse word, but sometimes people may behave in such a way around you that you cannot help it. Or say for example, people say that you should not lie, right? It is a truth which is universally acknowledged that one should not lie. But sometimes we find ourselves lying, whether it is white lie or black lie or violet, green, whatever lie, right? We find ourselves lying. So these are the little things through which we corrupt our soul. And we corrupt our soul, and by the time we become old, very old, we have corrupted our soul to such an extent that there is no chance of retreating into the heavens until and unless you meet your death. To summarize this lecture, to go over the concepts once more, metaphysical poetry is called so because not only because it deals with metaphysical ideas or spiritual ideas, but also because the language it employs is also metaphysical in nature. So there is the language which you would usually employ to talk about your emotions, feelings, whatever. And then sometimes you are faced with a subject or a topic, and because that subject or a topic is so new, and the way that you want to express your feelings is also so new, that you have to invent newness within the language that you are going to employ. And metaphysical poets did that. The second important thing is the metaphysical conceit. And conceit, as I said before, is your intellectual backbone of the poem, the very foundation on which a poem rests. And this conceit is made up by using very far-fetched metaphors. Like in the case of John Donne, we have seen that he is talking about hemisphere, he is talking about world, he is talking about maps. these are the kind of images, these are the kind of ideas that we do not usually associate with love poetry, right? In Henry Vaughan's poem, The Retreat, we see that the idea behind this poem is particularly based on the journey of one person from infancy to the old age. And the assumption that Vaughan is making is that as we grow old, we amass experiences which are good or bad, and these experiences, if the bad experiences, or if we participate in sinful activities, if such experiences increase with time, then we tend to lose touch with the divine, with the divine entity, with the divinity, with God, whatever you call it. And finally, in the case of Andrew Marvell's The Garden, we see that his conceit rests on this idea of man being the original gardener, and that it is only when he undertakes his duties as a gardener that he is able to attain the state of eternal happiness, eternal bliss, and supreme contentment. Thank you for watching the lecture. I'll see you later.